So, first question to you both. How can we find the balance between embracing technological progress such as AI and upholding the ethical values and foundations of human society? So, Vilas, maybe we start with you.
Amazing. Hi, everyone. I'm so delighted to be with you. Look, I'm going to tell you balance isn't what I'm solving for. I don't need to balance technological progress. I care about building an ethical society, one where justice is at the forefront, and using technology tools for what they are, tools that really let us get back to our core ideals about justice and equity. So the conversation we should have today is not at all about technology. It's about what we as a society are going to do when these tools show up. Who's going to own them? Who's going to create them? Who's going to use them? And ensuring that the benefits of those tools are going to all of us rather than just a few entities.
Cool. Yeah, thank you for inviting me back. You know, I was here 13 years ago at I was one of you, and yeah, exciting to be amongst all these young and brilliant people. We're definitely living in unprecedented times. So my foundation is also solving the same challenge, creating a cost-benefit evaluation framework focused on maximizing for human flourishing in the singularity era. Obviously, that is a non-linear problem, and it's a harder problem than building AI because we have to bring together all these multidisciplinary experts and also democratic public input. So I think in terms of balancing, pragmatically, there are three things. One is creating a value framework focused on human flourishing, and that don't exist right now. So we have some kind of a universal human rights as a foundation, and we have some principle-based values such as non-bias, transparency, privacy, and all of that is really good, but above that, everything is pretty much preferences, right, based on cultural, personal, and different groups, and it's very difficult for people to actually agree on values, including things like authenticity, which is very complex. And the second is, I'm very passionate about creating a fundamental economic paradigm shift because we are obviously at the end of late-stage capitalism, and I see a new economic paradigm coming, and I want it to be focused on human flourishing because for some people, value is about making a lot of money and stock price growing, but I think there is nothing more fundamentally valuable than being fulfilled and being in harmony with nature, having great mental health, which means quality connection with each other. So right now we don't really have those economic incentives to maximize for those things. Therefore, technology and algorithm that we are building are maximizing sometimes for the wrong thing, which is profit. So I think that is a more fundamental shift, and that's why I have a nonprofit. And the last one is obviously funding. So everybody's investing in AI, including myself, and it's easier to throw money and people at engineering problem, which is making AI capability better and stronger every single day, which is already naturally exponential. But solving this non-linear societal risk assessment problem is nonprofit, right? So it's like there is not really like a clear path to funding that is efficient and effective as much as the VC world. So I think Vilas and myself are kind of in the same field, and it's a much harder problem to solve. A very long-winded
No, it's
answer.
very good. It's excellent. Now, obviously, I kept the rule of any talk or panel on AI, which is you have to use ChatGPT at some point. So the first question I just asked you was obviously generated by ChatGPT, and that sort of leads into, A, could you tell, but B, there's kind of one school of thought that says we need digital watermarks, we need people to know what content is being created by generative AI, and there's another school of thought that says, that's crazy because it's going to be so prevalent that we actually can't do that. What are your views? Do we need a digital watermark on AI-generated content? Is it feasible, and is it something that's important to safeguard human creativity and distinguish it from AI-generated content?
Yeah, so if I go first, I think this is definitely needed, and it's in a lot of policy regulatory recommendation, and actually Google already has built a watermark for images, so differentiate AI images from non-AI images. But that is back to the value piece, right? Because authenticity might be important for some people, but some other people might not care, right? I might not care if that question was generated by ChatGPT. So how can we create those consensus based on democratic input is the main thing here.
Yeah, I'm struck by the fact that we've been through 3 major technological revolutions in the last 20 years. And as humans, we keep doing the same things over and over again. Your question's a great example of it. We focus on the short term. We focus on the question of the moment. We spend all of our time talking about it. ChatGPT in schools, ChatGPT in medicine, ChatGPT on stages like this. I'm concerned about the fact that we never ask the harder question about what happens 5 to 10 years from now. How do we think about AI not merely as the thing we need to regulate in the moment, but how we actually build an environment to have conversations about AI that aren't about digital watermarks and whether I own the content of what I spoke about, but how is this transformative tool going to transform human society? It's not to minimize the question. I think we have a lot of smart folks out there, technologists and engineers and ethicists, who are thinking about algorithmic bias and transparency and where we use ChatGPT. But let me ask you a different question. If we live in a world where 60% of GDP is driven by digital technologies, and we say that 2.6 billion people on the planet don't have access to the internet, that's the start of a digital divide that should be the conversation we're having. But let me add in 2 pieces to that. The second is ChatGPT. I was with the president of a very large technology company who sat next to me and said with a straight face, ChatGPT represents all of humanity's learnings. I said, excuse me, sir, but it represents about 1 billion global North English-speaking, relatively rich people who have been writing on the internet. It does not represent me, and it does not represent us. So this second critical question, who's represented in ChatGPT and in the AI technologies we're building, and what are we going to do about it? And the third and final point on this, when we say people are creating AI, who are they? Well, often, again, they're that same population. So what we should be talking about is not who owns, the new rap song that was built in the Taylor Swift style, but rather how do we put AI capacity in communities in every country represented here at One Young World so that communities can build the products they want for themselves.
Great points, and I think it leads me into another question. And I was reading, I think it was the New York Times recently, there was an article about how college application essays in the US, ChatGPT was actually very good at them. And, and this was a bad thing because everyone could now have a great college application essay. And I was sitting there going, but actually, the people who have them at the moment are paying a lot, it tends to be richer people paying a ton of money for somebody to help. And this democratizes the ability to have a great college essay. But it kind of touches on your second point. I mean, do you think AI is going to drive widening inequality? And what strategies can be implemented to mitigate against the potential widening of wealth inequality because of AI? Do you think it's going to be a positive force that makes the world much less divided, or one that accentuates the wealth gap?
I think it's really depending on how we govern it in the next 5 to 10 years. So that's the critical time. And also we are kind of, getting into recession. So I think in reality, a lot of the job automation situation will be impacted and shaped by the microeconomics, which is the reality. But in the ideal world, I think we should go back to those values, and equality and democracy should be coded into AI, right? So it's algorithmic. Otherwise, there's no way to really govern it from the outset. And I think technology has been kind of enabling the biggest inequality, like the wealth divide so far. The social media, the internet boom, and all of those has created super wealthy, minorities. And I think it's really dangerous for them to continue build on those capabilities using AI, because as I said before, technology and tools are there to maximize against an objective. And if that objective is maximizing profit, then they are going to be extremely good at it. So that's why we are very focused on democratic inputs. And this group is extremely valuable. Excited to hear your voice and about how we can better drive citizen participation. And we actually have built an AI model that takes input from planet-wide, so we call it all planet voting, to influence this value framework so that we can code it into the system.
Yeah, I very much agree. Let me say a couple of things. One is I want to start from the truth of the moment, which is the status quo doesn't work. It just doesn't. Technology companies that aggregate capital and power and now political might and hold the technologies that we have all created away from us as people doesn't work. Now, what do we do about that? Well, a few things. One is, I believe deeply in the idea that distributing technical capacity can help solve this problem. Pull it out of tech companies. Have governments around the world invest in public resources, cloud compute and training programs that let a person in Dominica, a person in Bhutan, a person in India, and a person in the US have the same opportunity to become an architect of our digital future. Let's start there. The second, let's build public movements around this, right? As I said, this isn't a technology issue, it's a social equity issue, which means young people and old, every single person should be coming out with a view on the idea that we should be using technology to do pro-social purposes. We are investing as an institution at the Patrick McGovern Foundation $75 million a year in supporting organizations like Keyun's to essentially build pro-social AI, to build tools that address what it looks like to find frontline health medical care in sub-Saharan Africa, to build climate solutions that let us understand what the effects of changing weather patterns will be on the most vulnerable populations, to figure out how we do disaster response more equitably. So it's a conversation that's ideological about distributing the benefits of these tools, and it's a very tactical conversation about how we build capacity and take agency in saying the digital world isn't going to be built for us by tech companies. We're going to build it for humanity.
Agency, yeah. Agency is the key word.
Yeah.
So building on that and to your earlier point about the sort of third revolution, I mean, I think what are the lessons we can learn from past technological revolutions and advancements? I mean, I think one of the obvious ones when social media came along, well, oh, this is amazing, isn't this great? I can like keep in touch with all my friends. And then, 5 years later, elections had been turned over, people having mental health issues, and we didn't see that coming. What are the lessons you think we can learn from previous technological revolutions that we can apply to AI?
Yeah, love this question. So I think we can look at AI from different lenses. So I would view it from evolutionary lens. So I would compare it more like inventing fire, right? So it's basically, since we invented fire, we had better food, cooked food, so we grow our brain, right? So I think that created human history, and I think AI is kind of creating a new kind of brain, and it's enhancing our intelligence. So we will see a new type of history going forward that we have not imagined before. But of course, we can also look at AI from a industrial revolution lens, which is a more narrow lens, and if we put humans on a random planet, we will begin similar foundational innovations in energy, communication, transport, healthcare, and I think there are many examples that of previous transformative technologies that the good and bad that we can learn, like electricity, automobile, nuclear. Nuclear is a great example of the world coming together, agree on a governance model. And also plastics and social media, I think they are examples of unintended consequences down the road, so both like a mid-term and long-term consequences. And also gene editing is a great example of a global ban, right? So because it's a transformative thing, I think we should learn everything that we can from previous kind of technologies, but I think just stop evaluating AI from the Gartner hype cycle because it's a too limiting lens.
Yeah.
Right.
I think lessons that follow exactly what you said, and I think that's so insightful. The first is, for some reason we've been okay for multiple cycles to never actually ask why we're building technologies. All it's taken is give me a profit model and go ahead and build it and deploy it. And whatever harms are created, somebody else will take care of it. We've got to stop that, right? So the first lesson is let's build technology for purpose, not for profit. The second is who are we building these tools for? I think if you look at social media, it's a perfect example, right? We built social media for a very specific and small demographic, and everybody else in the world had to figure out how to fit it for themselves. I wonder what social media would look like if we had brought creative and amazing and talented individuals from youth, from LGBTQ+ communities, from politically dissident communities, and said, what does a tool like this need to look like for you to build the movements that make your life better? We'd have a very different model of social media. And the third is, who are we building it for as a matter of economic participation and benefit? If you look at every model of technology development, and even going back to great leaders like Vint Cerf, who created the modern internet, it was still an idea that we were building it for commerce, we were building it for governance, and sometimes maybe for democratic values. But if we really hone in and we say we're trying to build it for this community to have more agency and dignity, it changes the very model. And I'm not going to look to tech companies to do that, although I think they'll be great partners. Instead, I'm going to look to civil society to do this. The organizations that have been at the front lines of vulnerability, that have been trying to figure out how to address these market failures, and instead say to them, let's equip you with money, with technical talent, and with the agency to go out and build the things that your communities need. If we do that, then I'm very optimistic, David. I do think that there is an amazing world possible ahead where AI is embedded into our human frameworks, but we don't talk about technology, we talk about inspiration and creativity and how these tools let us connect to each other in more effective ways. That's possible if we make the right decisions.
So I'm looking at the clock ticking down and going, how many more of these questions can I get in? How can we ensure that AI systems are designed with transparency, accountability, and fairness in mind to prevent its potential abuses?
Yeah, so that's back to the framework, right? Because I think these are really good values, but it's more short-term values that, we don't debate bias and transparency and all of that. But there are mid-term, long-term values that are more complex, and we need to work on that. And agreeing on those values is difficult, like authenticity, like whether we should have AI companions, AI friends, and AI girlfriends, and all of that. But I think for those the fundamental values you just mentioned, for the foundational models, like the big players that they're creating, definitely we need to have third-party audits, which is already happening, and we actually commissioned an audit on the top 15 LLMs on the market on gender bias, and they're not doing that great. So there is a lot of room to improve from an external validation point of view. And also I think on the application side, there is a lot of room for misuse, so that's difficult to govern. And so we are advocating for a more granular categorization of different type of AI, because there can be so many different applications. And for some type, we might need to have like a clinical trial type of assessment process before it goes to the market. And obviously, for every value that we agree on, there needs to be testing capabilities, and sometimes it's difficult to test, such as gender bias, right? So we basically came up with thousands of prompts and see what the different models will complete the sentence, whatever, and how biased they are, and it's very complex. And sometimes we also need continuous tests. So this is a complex field. It's much more complicated than building AI itself.
Yeah, you're hitting all the key questions, and I think that was a really appropriate response. I will say, I think the key thing I will say here is the big conversation has been about regulating ethical AI. I'm like a common sense small town kid. I'm like, what is ethical AI? How is a technology ever going to be ethical? Let's just put that to the side. What if we instead talked about an ethical society driven by AI? Who would be responsible for that? It's not a conversation we'd be having with the people who are designing AI systems. It's a conversation we'd be bringing to our governments and our policy spaces and our youth movements and saying, what is it that you want to see in the ethical deployment of these tools? I think ethics in technology is a responsibility we all should share, and that we should direct technologists on. If you're interested, a little bit of a self-serving plug, but I have a course on ethics in generative AI that isn't for technologists. It's for all of us. It's free. It's available on LinkedIn. You can find it very easily.
Fantastic.
And it talks about how, in our roles as consumers, as employees of a company, as hopefully decision makers, we all have something to say about what transparent AI should look like.
Excellent. So in the last minute, if each of you would tell me, what is it that excites you most about AI, and what is it that scares you most about AI?
Great question. So as I said, I think we live in unprecedented times, and that's both exciting and scary. And I think we are, and you guys, and together with you guys, I think we need to really think big, because it's a historical time to drive fundamental shifts, paradigm shifts, and it's hard problem to solve, but it has long-term benefits that can shape the future of society. And I think AI is a tool and the capability that actually will transform history of humanity. So I think you want to be on the right side of history, basically, is what I'm thinking.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Yes.
What scares me is the idea that we might all be so scared of AI that we step away from it and we say somebody else will figure it out. And I think if that happens, then nothing good happens for humanity. But here's what excites me. I get to play with a lot of emerging AI because of my role, right? And people come and show me the newest stuff. And sometimes I will do something I'm not supposed to and maybe bring in my nieces and nephews and say, hey, let's figure this out together. the ways that kids of all ages engage with these tools, from the youngest kind of kids who are seeing that they don't care about AI and they don't necessarily know very much about transparency or fairness, but they do know that it allows them to take their creativity and what they're envisioning in their minds and bring it up on a screen, to design with an AI assistant, to build art, to write new music. Like, the ways that we're expanding what it means to be human is so incredible. What if we could share that joy with every person in this room, every person on the planet, and have a new renaissance of human art? How wonderful would that be?
Fantastic note to end on.
Thank you so much.
Keyun, wonderful to have you back.
Thank you, thank you, yeah, thank you.
Great example of a young leader growing into a leader. Vilas, great to see you. Great job again. Take care.